The Survivalist Podcast with Mark Puhale and Matt Gould. In each episode of The Survivalist Podcast, we look at different events and catastrophes that could happen in different areas of the world. Then we give you the knowledge, resources, and recommendations you need to survive. We'll explore scenarios from a worldwide financial collapse to a coordinated terrorist attack to a global climate catastrophe and everything in between. The Survivalist Podcast is brought to you by Survival Cash, Ford Survival Supply, and thebugoutrace.com. Please visit our website, thesurvivalistpodcast.com, for more information or to give us feedback. And now, The Survivalist Podcast with Mark Puhale and Matt Gould.
Today we're going to look at Ted Koppel's book, Lights Out, which I've read and I really enjoyed and I thought was really spot on. Mark, what do you think about the book?
I agree. I expected a little different read, especially from how the book is broken down, Matt. Lights Out, we both know there's been many books written about a lights out scenario, about a grid down scenario, or an EMP attack. There's been TV shows or specials on this subject. And looking at the book and looking at the three sections of the book, the first one being Cyberattack, the second one being A Nation Unprepared, and then the third one, Surviving the Aftermath, I think he does a really good job in painting the picture of what could likely occur and speaking with, this isn't something that he just came up with on his own. He went to the top people in the country who are authorities in cyberspace, cybersecurity, heads of national defense, heads of NSA. He went to very, very credible sources to gather information to write this book. For the audience, the premise of the book is the United States is attacked by a rogue state. Could be one person on a computer, could be a small nation state, could be ISIS, could be Iran, could be China, could be Russia. And essentially they affect a grid down scenario. And he describes how in the United States, we essentially have three major electrical grids that are very, very vulnerable to attack.
You know, my favorite part of the book, just because I come at it as a TV producer, more, not as a survivalist expert that you are, is the very beginning. Because for me, it paints a picture of what it's going to look like. So I'll just quote a little bit and then tell me if that's accurate, Mark, okay?
Okay.
Darkness, extended periods of darkness longer and more profound than anyone now living in one of America's great cities has ever known. As power shuts down, there is a darkness and the sudden loss of electrical conveniences. As batteries lose power, there is more gradual failure of cell phones, portable radios, and flashlights. Emergency supplies of bottled water are too scarce to use for anything but drinking, and there is nowhere to replenish the supply. Disposal of human waste becomes a critical issue within days. Supermarkets and pharmacy shelves are empty in a matter of hours. It is a shock to discover how quickly a city can exhaust its food supplies. So that's just the way the book starts.
Yep. We've talked a little bit about some of this before. What Ted does in this book and what I think a lot of us were afraid to accept that this situation could occur. I think, Matt, you were in Manhattan in 2003 when the power grid went down.
Yes, so I was.
That was fortunately a finite amount of time. Fortunately, I mean, the greatest time that I've lost power is probably maybe 12 hours going through a hurricane a couple times, either in Okinawa or in the northeastern United States. So this extended period of darkness, people are not going to, they don't think it's going to happen. They don't think it's going to occur. They think that we have enough redundancies in place and that we have enough backups in place to prevent a full-blown power outage. This darkness, this loss of power, loss of electricity, loss of batteries, loss of backup generators, it's going to occur. It's not something that can be fixed overnight. It's not like there's a lightning strike in your backyard and it hits the transformer on your telephone pole. There's things in our electrical grid that are older, that are between 30 and 40 years old, that are specific to the geography with whatever power they provide that can't be fixed overnight. These high power transformers, they can't get back online immediately.
Right. And how long could it be? I mean, from what I read in the book, it could be months or years.
It could be months or years. There's only a few manufacturers in the United States to manufacture these high-power transformers. Most of the companies that do that are in Europe. the infrastructure to move, they weigh 500,000 pounds. So it's not like they could be built and then easily transported to where they're needed. And then the voltage has to be right for the transformers that are blown. That darkness, that whole darkness piece, the fact that we're without power, we're in chaos, the shit hit the fan and the pucker factor when you're at home and there's still no word. Or you fortunately have a hand crank radio, you get in tune with some emergency broadcast network and you find out it's not just happening in the eastern United States, it's pushed out to the Mississippi. Let's just say hypothetically that half of the country is without power. Then what happens? And that's what he's painting this picture in chapter 1, that power in the eastern United States, it's out and it's going to be out for a long time. Let's say best case scenario, if the transformers are attacked like he hypothesizes or surmises that could be done in a cyber attack, that power could be out for 6 months at a minimum.
Right. So let me read a little more. As it goes on, he's saying the amount of water, food, and fuel consumed by a city of several million inhabitants is staggering. Emergency supplies are sufficient only for a matter of days.
When we mentioned on our last show, I guessed, New York would probably be good for maybe 3 days. And Ted, he says New York would be emptied in 2 days. Empty of food. Empty of food. Within a couple days, and then potable water. He throws that in the mix with the 2-day scenario. Think about everybody in the high rises in the city with yes, there's gravity fed water from if they have water on the top of their building, but think about sewage. All these survivalist people, or everyone thinks that no one's going to get hurt. You're still going to be able to do your business, i.e., go to the bathroom, go to the head, and you're not going to have sewage or waste buildup. Are you going to throw it in the streets like medieval Europe? What are you going to do with human feces, human waste, people who can't get medicine, people who are on ventilators, people who they require home health care, they require a nurse visit every day?
Hold on a second. I think we're ready for Doc Montana. So Mark, do you want to tell us about who Doc Montana is, and then we'll patch him in?
Sure. So Doc Montana is one of our senior authors for survivalcache.com. He's written numerous reviews and educational articles on the website. He's got a PhD in computer science. He teaches in the Northwestern United States. He is smart. He writes a lot of articles for us, and he knows his shit. The reason why we have him on the show is he just wrote a review for Lights Out in our most recent newsletter that just went out last week.
So, Doc, first of all, this scenario isn't new. The idea of the power grid going down. It's not new to survivalists, but is this the first time we've seen it in the mainstream like this with a mainstream reporter writing about it?
Well, actually, it is in this venue, but if you kind of trace back where Ted Koppel got his idea, he actually picked it up from Leon Panetta, Janet Napolitano, and Obama in speeches where they alluded to this. And that's what got him going. What he has done is kind of moved it out of the sort of the prepper fiction arena that usually deals more with EMPs, and then chased it down, essentially providing the proof that not only could this happen, but it probably will happen. And that's what really has changed. It's not something we can kind of turn on and off in fiction right now and kind of assume that this bad thing is hanging out there, but literally to say, here's what's going to happen, this is how it's going to happen, and the why is probably already out there.
And Matt, when you asked me that before, like at the beginning of the show, that's what I expected, a little bit more of a fictional component to the book, whereas he, just like Doc Montana said, he outlined essentially everything that could be done to, one, take the power grid down, and then what that senior leadership of the country is attempting to put in place that could possibly stop this situation from happening.
One of the issues with leadership that Koppel discovered is that if there is no plan, there's no point in talking about it.
Right.
And there is no plan, which means that's part of the reason you don't hear about a threat like this, kind of like, a giant asteroid colliding with the Earth. We can't do anything about it. So as a public leader, you wouldn't want to dwell on it because you've got nothing.
You got nothing. And then He also talks about the monetary ramifications if we were to put some type of plan or semblance of a plan in place. And with the folks that he interviewed, he got the runaround as far as if there was a plan, not only at the federal level, but also at state and local government, civic authorities, police departments. I think we remember when he had someone call into FEMA and wanted to learn about preparedness. They got, I can't remember how many, press number 1 if you want to do this, press number 2 if you want to do this, press number 3. So someone in the American public was looking for information from the agency that's supposed to provide information to its citizenry and keep us safe, and they couldn't get it.
Yeah, I guess that's another heck of a job, Brownie kind of moment.
Yeah.
I guess. Let me read you a little passage from the book that kind of goes with this and see what you think about that, Doc. He says, the majority believe that power outages are limited in duration, that help always arrives from beyond the edge of darkness, is undergoing a crisis of conviction. The assumption that the city, the state, or even the federal government has the plans and the wherewithal to handle this particular crisis is being replaced by the terrible sense that people are increasingly on their own. When that awareness takes hold, it leads to a contagion of panic and chaos. So he's talking about in the future tense when it happens. But can you talk about that national belief and when that might turn to panic and chaos?
If you had asked me this a few years ago, I probably would have done the usual, well, you got about 3 days or 9 meals from anarchy. But I think the awareness that things could go bad and stay bad is permeating the culture right now, which means our reaction time is going to be much faster. And as you know, with our interconnectedness in our daily lives, it's going to be crystal clear, when that whole system fails, which those people who are more opportunistic or violent are probably going to reach their tipping point much faster. So I think that the truth of the matter is, if we sense that there is no help arriving, in any time soon, which is going to be pretty clear, that in fact things will go bad in probably a matter of hours, is my guess. I've tried to come up with a way to describe this to people because it's so overwhelming. And the way I kind of describe it now is the power grid is kind of like a flowing freeway. If you imagine in California or something, a great big freeway, and everybody's moving along just fine, and from a distance it looks smooth, but it's actually millions of these little adjustments of speed by all kinds of different vehicles, and the distance between them changes and the speed changes, and they're all working sort of together, and that's how the grid works. But imagine somebody tosses a nail out there in the highway. Most robust systems, big tires are going to ignore it, but somebody's out there driving their old Pinto with bald tires, which would be a small consolidated electric company with a vulnerable chunk of hardware. And then they hit the nail, they swerve, everybody else swerves, they crash, trucks jackknife and flip over, and in less than a minute the whole highway's closed. Now, we would think, okay, there's lots of other cars and there's going to be help arriving, and you kind of put up with it. But what if that was the new norm for the next 18 months? A trashed out highway and nobody's got cars that work anymore. And that's when you realize, wait a minute, nobody can help me. I'm on my own. Whatever we've got is all we've got, except for primitive ways. And what we're going to end up doing is realizing that we had an unsupported, basically unsustainable population in an area that can't survive on its own. And that will take about an hour.
Yeah. Before you got on the call, we briefly talked about the lack of high power transformer redundancy in our system and how long it would take to build a new transformer and transport it without the infrastructure to move it.
Yeah, the issue you brought up with the transformers is that's kind of the Achilles heel of the system, and many of them are kind of what I call an artisan design. They're a one-off, custom made for a very specific location. And Koppel assumes that maybe there is the ability to get another one, even if it's 18 months out. Well, that may be the case. There are very few places you can get one of these. And that's when things are working perfect and you've paid for it up front, and there isn't a line of 10,000 other people in front of you that need these custom things that take a year to make. And the infrastructure that's already built around them, they may have been put in 30, 40 years ago, well, there have been bridges and buildings and the roads have changed. So it's not as if you can even move this 500,000 pound critter down the road and just drop it in a new place. You know, the other aspect is the lines, the connections, all of the damage that's taken place, the fragmentation. Even if you brought the grid up in a year, you know, you're still looking at potentially half to even up to 90% of the population dead. That's you know, Koppel's getting some numbers there. If you think in the first week, just the sheer number of people, you know, depending when it hits too.
Yeah,
if it's in the middle of winter or summer. The New York one, there were actually 3, and the one people point at, you know, with a lot of the rioting, that dealt with when it occurred. Probably that was evening, so they really couldn't get a handle on it. It was nighttime when this happened versus in the middle of the day. Partially it has to do with the economy, partially it has to do with when it occurs and how vested people are. And that they learned, boy, you got to be careful or people will riot. So they were a little bit more prepared for that kind of a human reaction. In this case, if we're alone, the moment we figure that out, that's when I see a major switch where we're all going after our own individual survival, our own stuff. I think people will you know, the greed and the hoarding will hit instantly at that point. And then because so many people know about it now, you're going to have a much higher proportion of population, you know, that takes off running rather than stands around wondering when help's going to arrive.
Right.
And I think we're already seeing that. I mean, Doomsday Preppers, was a TV phenomenon. So it's obviously planted the seeds that when something bad happens, and people think about it all the time. I hear stories of that, you know, geez, lights flickered and I thought that was it. You know, here we go. That shouldn't be your first thought, but it's a pretty common thought.
And tell me about, I guess I don't really understand how exactly it could happen. So can you talk about who would want to do it to us, first of all, or who would want to take down the power grid, and then how they would do it, if you can understand it better. I have read the book, but it's still a little bit difficult to understand exactly how it would work. Well,
there are lots of scenarios, starting with the who. It could be anyone from a bored hacker who's kind of playing around. I imagine there's actually a fairly large component that could be accidental, because we have done lots of things by accident. And then I think there's no shortage of enemies of America, whether they're at the government level or the nation state level. You know, you could imagine even ISIS in a sleeper cell, if they could recruit, some MIT grads who could figure this out. But basically, one of the scenarios is that if you have essentially an unsecured connection to a computer system that's running a transformer, you can cause that transformer to do things, and that can maybe to start pulsing the electricity, which is going to cause other computers to have to try to balance the load. If you think about those cars, if you get this, the one driver on the highway who's talking on a text or talking on a cell phone, and they're hitting the brakes at weird times, and it causes a bunch of funny reactions, ultimately you could get overheating, you could get systems shutting down, which if this happens fast enough, it will cause other systems to crash. If you can overload those, or they overheat, they blow up, and basically I was in one power outage in Idaho once we got our power up from Utah, and Utah got shut down because there was an earthquake in LA. And there was this cascade effect, which is what Mr. Koppel was talking about, where one system starts to go down and it affects others and affects others. And then finally it starts blowing them up literally, because it's like a focused energy. Mm-hmm. So the question is where you can start that cascade effect. But just like that nail on the highway, it might be one of these little tiny services, little tiny substations somewhere that causes this chain reaction. Or better yet, you have a handful of those. And with the computer, you might be able to do targeted adjustments of the power to cause bigger systems to go down. It's essentially a big balancing act, because we don't store electricity.
Right.
We just shovel it around. We fire up more power plants when there's higher demand. We shut them down when we don't need them. peak hours, things like that. It's all a giant computerized balancing activity. But if you focused through hacking power in one area, you're going to blow up that transformer, or melt the lines, or cause problems, which is going to have to cause a reaction in order to maintain the balance. If you target a few of those just right, the system will kind of destroy itself.
Right.
That's an unfortunate response, but many times there are cascading. We call them fault trees sometimes. You can trace them backwards and say, okay, this caused this, which caused this, which caused this, and it was that tiny little bolt that the nut fell off of, which loosened this. Sometimes we call the airplane rivet theory, that you are able to pull out rivets on a flying airplane. It's not going to crash until you get to one more rivet, and when you pull that one out, it all comes apart. But which one is that? So there's a lot of durability, flexibility in our grid, but if you can get it to a certain point or choose that critical rivet, then everything comes apart. And that's what he's talking about. So it isn't like it could happen easily. The problem is it could happen, and there's really no way to stop it or prevent it, other than our current security measures, which we all know how those work.
Right. And I think we need to mention that with the privatization of electricity now, the mom and pop shop, let's say I want to open up something in South Texas, and I'm trying to make a buck and pay employees and put up lines and put up a transformer. My focus is on making money. It's not necessarily on cybersecurity. It might not be something that I'm even considering, because I'm trying to keep the lights on in my office. Essentially, there's no plan in place. We're very, very open. And like you mentioned before, Doc Montana, you as the politician, you don't want to talk about problems without having a solution in place.
All right, let's talk about the effects of something like this. And one of the passages in the book, Ted Koppel spoke with the administrator of FEMA and asked him very point-blank questions about what would happen if there was prolonged and widespread power outage. And what that administrator said is, we're not a country that can go without power for a long period of time without loss of life. Our systems, from water treatment to hospitals to traffic control to all these things that we expect every day, our ability to operate without electricity is minimal. So that's the government's official response, I guess. What's going to happen if we go without power for a long time?
Well, I think we learned after 9/11 that we do need isolated generators that can run critical infrastructure to get us back going. But that's assuming it's short-term and help. So obviously there's a fuel supply for the generator, and we see a lot of them, the big kind of yellow Caterpillar generators on buildings and by pumping stations and things. Those are all backups just in case. That will run on fuel. Since this isn't an EMP we're talking about, we've got everything running with whatever power we have. Cars start and they'll run until they go out of gas, and we can manually get gas out of the ground at gas stations until that's gone. And I'd give that just a couple of days. But what Koppel is hitting on is literally our basically food and water is going to require, or at least the distribution and purification of the water is going to require electricity. All medical care pretty much requires electricity. We're going to have to deal with everything being dark all the time. High rises that need HVAC systems, those are all going to go dark. If it's summer, those are all going to turn into solar ovens. They're going to be unlivable. You aren't going to be able to go up and down stairs, for 100 floors easily. I mean, they're basically going to be useless. Subways, any kind of electrical transportation is going to stop. So now imagine you freeze all that. You got scared people. It's dark. The stores are not going to last long. So let's go down the road, maybe 2 days. What's going to happen? You're going to have a lot of people bugging in. They're going to board up their houses and wait a few days. You're going to have a lot of people taking off. But a majority of the people are just going to sit there not knowing what to do. They can't walk, 100 miles somewhere. And even if they did, they're just going to meet the people 100 miles away who are walking towards them. Can't drink ocean water. You're going to see a lot of very bad things very quickly. It's not like The Walking Dead where they're survival supplies scattered all over because the people are gone. It's going to be everything. It's going to be locusts, basically, in a field, and it's going to be stripped bare, and then we're going to stare at each other. And we see this happening in other countries and war-torn areas, and we know how it plays out. So that's where, us like at Survival Cache and the products we offer are trying to make people aware and buy them more time. I see things settling out after a while. Unfortunately, you're probably going to have fiefdoms and, gang governments, and, it's going to go to medieval times. We know how humans react. And literally that's going to be, the new landscape. And for some reason, a lot of people think, even like going back to that 18 months to get a new transformer, who's going to install it? Where are the truck drivers? These people who do our community services and power and engineers, they don't have survival superpowers. In fact, they're maybe even less prepared than we are.
Right.
So
and how many are going to show up? How many military, law enforcement, FEMA personnel are going to show out with a nationwide power outage?
Yeah.
How many people are going to be called to duty, or are they going to go run back to their families? Or if they're not in the same geography, are they going to go, to their parents, to their wife, if they're deployed?
Yeah.
Who's going to show up?
Yeah. I mean, we saw like at 9/11 or even power outages and ice storms on the East Coast, or firefighting out here. We'll ship in people to help because most of the nation isn't affected. In this case, we're all affected, which means you're not going to get up and drive your, bucket truck to another state to help put up power lines that blew down. That's not going to happen. So Where are all these people, even if there was an infrastructure? Who's going to drive the trucks? They're going to get looted instantly. We can't even do armed security UN convoys without risking them, being taken over.
Not only that, but to go back to the book, has it been rehearsed? Has it been discussed? Has it been if there's a grid down scenario for a week, a month, a 3 month, what's a 6 month, a year? What's the contingency? Who are the players? Who are those players even going to be alive?
Yeah.
What's the primary, tertiary, alternate, primary, secondary, tertiary plan for this, which we're not even giving lip service to it.
No, I figure it was, a bunch of, heads of different departments in the government probably had a cup of coffee and realized this was a non-starter. Let's just ignore it.
What about other countries? What about Canadian electrical experts? Could they come down and help us, or people from Europe or people from Mexico?
Well, are we headed down to help fight the Mexican drug wars? I mean, I think they're probably going to hang out and watch us for a while until we calm down. And then, you'd like to think that this is the 21st century. We'll straighten this out. I imagine there will be a lot of relief, but we don't know for sure how that's going to play out when you have eliminated the infrastructure. People look at movies like Red Dawn or the TV show Jericho or something of how this will play out. And but go down the road a year. We're talking not that many people still around at that point.
Right.
You're going to go through a winter. Think about that with no power, no heat. What are you going to do? Break into people's homes to sit by their fireplace? I mean,
right.
And even then,
mass migration in the winter south just to stay warm. And then how are people going to? Are you going to take in 10 people into your home? Like me
but
being
even
in South
think of
Texas.
the migration.
Right.
How are they getting there? Are they going to stop at the 7-Eleven, every few hours to get something to eat? They go 2 days without eating and hiking, and especially if you're in a city, you're not going to live. I mean, we've seen that play out in war zones.
Right.
And
Bataan Death. I'm doing a race in March, the Bataan Death March. I mean, think about 8 million. How many people in New York now, Matt? 8 million?
Yeah.
I think there's 8.3 million in the city, and then people say there's 19 million in the area.
Yeah. You're not going to – are you going to see a mass exodus to Jersey to go hunt and get pine nuts and acorns and try to kill deer? It's not going to happen.
Yeah, even do the deer numbers, and that's gone overnight.
Right. For
even around here in Montana, we figured out the deer density per square mile. and that's a non-starter. It might buy you a week, and then it's over, and you killed your crop. You ate your seeds.
Yeah,
because they're going to kill everything. People are going to be panicking.
It's not like you can refrigerate it.
No,
back to caveman style.
Yeah,
Right.
And even then, the quantity is pretty low. If you trace where we get a lot of our calories, it's tremendously fuel intensive, and it's not from home. It's not from anywhere nearby. And that's on a good day with lots of trucks showing up. You can stop it for a day, and you're going to have panic. In fact, just the other day, I noticed some of the big sellers of freeze-dried food are out. So if you think now you can jump on board, and then that's also with a lot of supplies. Once we get a little nervous, you're going to see a rush, and most of the supply companies are not producing hundreds of thousands of these items, and they're distributed in every Walmart.
Right.
Like stuff we sell at Survival Kit or the Survival Shop at Forge Survival, you don't have 5,000 of something sitting around.
Right, and it even talks about this in the book too. Think about the shelf life of an MRE; it's 5 years, so those are not stockpiled. The food, the crops, the vegetation, the fruit, the meat to make these items. It talked about some other survival companies that manufactured food that they're on back order, like you mentioned. They're on back order now.
Yep.
So how are we going to sustain a major city, for example, that tries to bug out in place? You can't. It's over. It's impossible.
Yeah, that ship sailed.
So it's such a grim picture, especially if we're talking about New York, where the head of the relief organization, the head of emergency preparedness for New York City, said basically they couldn't evacuate people. What did he say? We're never going to evacuate New York City. What we would do is set up shelters for people to basically reside in. And then they asked him what would happen if it went, on for a month. He said New York City could probably last for 2 days. That was That was what he said. So in other words, many people would die. Everyone would be hungry. Everyone would be panicking, rioting, looking out for themselves. So what could we do is the question. What could we do? If this is something that, someone from the mainstream media is saying it's not if, but when. So we're talking about something that's going to happen within our lifetimes, presumably, and no one's ready for. So that is a very terrifying proposition. So what could the average person do?
Well, I think there are probably three main things they can do. One is acknowledge there is a problem, and Koppel makes that clear, and start planning. In some way, you're just aware of things, your own food supply, where else you could go. You don't have to figure that out while your hair's on fire. Another thing is to exactly what Koppel is also saying: get a food supply. He's done it, and you can. This isn't a 3-day job. This is go into the months if you can. And I prefer the freeze-dried realm, mainly because of the very long shelf life. It's super light, and if you don't have water, you're already screwed. So it's not like I hear some complain, well, you need water to hydrate it. Well, yeah, you do. You need to hydrate you, and if you've got no water, the food is not your issue.
Right, and for the listeners, from a freeze-dried standpoint, freeze-dried food can last up to 25 years versus a shelf life of an MRE, which is only 5 years.
Yeah, and that's what they're rated to. I don't know why you couldn't eat one in 100 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I would certainly rather eat one than die. So I would probably go for that 100-year-old one.
And the third area is personal security. And everyone who, probably starts down the kind of the survival road, is immediately thinking guns and knives. And I do believe that is an important part of it. I honestly don't, I hope it doesn't go down that road, but that I've got the rest of the world as kind of a model of what can happen. And honestly, if you're a soft target, it's over. So there's that aspect. If you had to add to that, start building up, skills, but I don't know exactly which skills are going to be necessary. Out here, survival skills and, means we head to the mountains, but we can do that, and we've got extra places on mountain lakes and things like that. And I know there are other people planning on doing that, from other areas, but, can you get out of the way? Can you, stand to the side while this unstoppable mess takes place in the town you used to live in, and that's where I think surviving probably the first couple of weeks is going to be the most difficult in terms of humans, and then it's going to switch gears to just nature. So can you make it through that first couple of weeks so then you can start planning long term?
Yeah, and like he talks about, and like we could probably maybe agree upon, depending on where you're at in the United States, is bug in place, see what's going on. You might think the average Joe might think help's coming. Well, when help doesn't come, and the food runs out, and your toilet backs up, and you have no potable water, what are you going to do? And like you said, have you thought about that? Have you acknowledged it? And then what steps or measures have you taken to get out of there when the position's untenable? Which we can probably all agree, again, that I don't know what the percentage is, 95% of America hasn't even thought about this, doesn't even acknowledge it.
Yeah, it's probably higher if you ask, really accepts it as a true issue.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, there's learned helplessness. It's a psychological term. If there's after enough things you can't do anything about, you stop trying to do anything about them.
If it's not a matter of if, but when this happens, and if there's going to be a tremendous loss of life, and if people in highly populated areas like New York City are just in deep, deep shit, it just makes me feel despair, really. So what could be done?
Well, ideally, we could all get on the same page about this and be prepared. Like going to war, bad things are going to happen. But if we feel like at least somebody's prepared, there's a central organization, even if it's local, that's going to have to make decisions. There's some form of preserved democracy, even locally, just so we know, who the leaders are and we don't have to fight to make new leaders. I think that's important. I think all local places should start building their own stockpiles. I don't know how long it'll last, but I think the longer we go into it, the better we'll be. So if you think of it as a steep climb that levels off.
Yeah.
Once we get to a point, you shouldn't be on your freeze-dried food in a year. You should have transitioned off of it into, whatever life, we can create at that point. We need to figure out other solutions. The person we started talking about, they mentioned solar. Yeah, solar is important. That would be a very good thing maybe for critical infrastructure, hospitals, et cetera, to start thinking about. We won't have the water pressure for long showers, obviously, but we might be able to use solar and wind to get some water flowing for basic, at least maybe even for the treatment plants. Think about things like that. And just what's the absolute base minimum that is needed to keep people going? Not lattes, but just basic survival, and work towards that, because I believe attitude is going to be a big part of it. And if all of a sudden we're all a bunch of individuals fighting for survival, clawing over each other, it'll be like stampedes we see in other countries. We're going to go right over the top of whoever's in front of us. But if we believe that there's more to it, and that's kind of how I ended my review of the book, that the enemies are assuming we're only as good as our grid, and if they can flick the switch on our grid, we're all going to kill each other. But if we're as good as America, then we stand for something, and power would make life a lot easier. But it's not the end of America. So I think it comes down to what we are preparing to believe in under these kinds of challenges.
That's very powerful. Thank you so much, Doc, and we look forward to talking to you again very soon about other topics.
Wonderful. I'm excited about it too. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
So, Mark, I know that your background as a soldier, very successful soldier, you think
Marine, not a soldier. Marines Army.
I'm sorry, Mark. So, Marines do not fall into the subcategory of soldier in any way?
Nope. We're Marines.
Okay. So you're a very successful Marine, and so you're going to be thinking about security first and foremost. I know that about you by now, I think. Is that one of the first things you think of when you think about this type of a lights out scenario?
I think about security with my friends and my family, first and foremost. That, and then security, communication in the event that we're not together. Say we're all separated. Say this happens in a couple of years and my daughter's away at college. How am I going to get her? Like Dr. Montana said, acknowledge that this could potentially occur. So for one, and then how are you going to prepare that individually? I'm thinking about security measures, communication plan with my immediate family, friends, loved ones. Then how am I going to get communication from higher authority, local, state, federal government? I want to make sure I have.
I thought you were talking about God when you were talking about higher authority.
Yeah, I have redundancies in place. Like I want to continue my individual preparation from a food, fire, water, shelter, security, and communication standpoint, and think some like things I haven't done at my bug out location. I want to get that off grid. It's not quite off grid yet, so I want to have that set up. When I was reading this book, I thought about I have a shed out at my place. I need to make that shed a Faraday cage, like we did on the show. That
right.
Just where I can put all of my electrical components and items. That's one thing I thought about. I also thought about I have a well right now that runs on electricity, and it's thousands of feet deep. So I need to have some type of hand pump or something to get the water out of there, because the water should still be good. It's aquifer purified water in South Texas. I also need to increase my food stores. It's really hard to build a larder in South Texas because there's only 6 to 8 inches of topsoil, and then it gets down to granite. So I would have to dynamite the ground to get underground for storage, and then I'm thinking about security measures at my location, setting up a defensible position if I needed to defend myself, and then of course increasing ammo supply, weaponry, communication with my neighbors in that location, and so there's a lot of things that come to mind, a lot of things that came to mind when I was reading this book that I think I'm behind on, and I think I'm pretty prepared.
Yeah, I would say you're one of the most prepared people I know. So that's it. Next
Well,
episode.
can I leave it with this, Matt? Be survival smart, be survival fit, be survival mean, tough. Prepare for the worst and only be let down.
You've been listening to the Survivalist Podcast with Mark Puhalle and Matt Gould. Brought to you by Survival Cash, Ford Survival Supply, and thebugoutrace.com. Please visit our website, thesurvivalistpodcast.com. This show is produced by Chad Dugatz at the Hangar Studios in New York City.